Today, prepare yourself for stories about strange encounters in the wilderness. If you listen to these stories, you might never look at cabins the same way again. The next time you eat s'mores over an open fire, just remember that there are creepy things out in the wilderness with you that would love to eat your chubby lusciousness under the pale moonlight. So, enjoy these 6 allegedly true scary stories, and remember to share your own with us at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org. Now, let's begin. Mystery on the Reservation. From LOKETHA, Angel. I'm a 30-year-old woman who listens to podcasts on Spotify nearly every day while I work. I listen to creepy and paranormal stuff, and it really creeps me out and intrigues me, and it has really reminded me of an experience I had myself, one that I think would be best to share. Not long ago, my husband, daughter, and I made a long 5-hour trip to Holly Lake on the White Mountain Apache Reservation in Arizona. My daughter didn't want to go for some reason, and being only 2, her protests fell on deaf ears. She had been sick throughout the week, and I should have taken that as a sign. What's more, she was ill on the way up north, but I still ignored the sign, attributing it to motion sickness from the winding roads in the canyon. We were meeting some family for a little getaway in the woods. My grandparents rented a cabin by the lake where my small family, father and girlfriend, aunt and uncle, grandparents, and great-grandmother, all stayed for a few days. The first day seemed promising and was uneventful. That night, however, things got strange. We lay down around 8 p.m., the 3 of us sharing a bed. We laughed, giggled, and talked, enjoying each other's company until we fell asleep. But I woke up at around midnight to the sound of something metallic. The room was pitch black and near silent, except for the snores of my husband. I peeked through the window and saw nothing. Not even the moon and stars were visible. I decided to walk downstairs and step out onto the porch to get some fresh air. As I stood there, taking in a big breath, I heard the same metallic sound. I scoured the night with my eyes, but saw nothing. Everything seemed still and peaceful. I figured it was my imagination, until I heard the growl. I turned towards the lake, and the growl seemed to grow deeper, more menacing. At first, I saw nothing, but then I saw 2 orange orbs near a tree. Now, I should mention there are cows that graze the fields near the lake. When I told my family of these events, they brushed it off as just cows on a late-night graze. I never heard of a cow growl before, though. After seeing these orbs, I rushed inside and was sick to my stomach. That was just the first night. The second day, as I mentioned, I told my family of this, and they mostly ignored it or explained it away with nonsense. I tried to not think about it too much, and everything seemed fine, save that I couldn't eat or drink anything. My husband spent most of the day by the lake, and my daughter played Doc McStuffins to my sudden sickness. That night, my husband, who is generally a gentle soul, became quite angry and irritable. My daughter was crying most of the night, and even my grandfather was short-tempered. Everybody seemed on edge, and I was still grossly sick to my stomach. Unable to fall asleep as everyone slowly drifted off, I again found myself sitting on the porch. It was earlier than the previous night, about 10 p.m., but again, it was pitch black dark. I was sitting on the stairs waiting for another wave of nausea to pass when I heard the growl again. This time the orbs that accompanied the growl were closer. I could make out a body attached to the orbs. I have a horrible sense of measure, so I'm not sure how tall it was, but it was taller than the sign that said, "Do not drive off-road." It was on 2 legs, but was hunched over enough that the arms were almost touching the ground. There were spikes or spines coming from the back, but beyond that, I couldn't see much more. I heard the growl again, followed by a screech akin to someone choking on water. I was so scared, I couldn't move. When it growled again, I was finally able to will myself to run back inside and into the bedroom. While laying there trembling in the bed, contemplating about what I'd seen, my daughter spoke to me. She is 2 years old and words are not her friends, but she said clear as day, clear as you or I said so. I said no. You don't listen." I flipped on the light, waking my husband, only to see that my daughter was asleep. I knew then that we had to leave. So at 2:30 in the morning, we loaded our truck and left as quickly as possible. When I spoke to my grandparents the next day, lying to them that I was simply too sick to stay, they confided that their grill had been destroyed the previous night by some animal. My father stated his rental had 3 deep scratches along the passenger side too, and a nearby tree had been downed right next to the cabin. They again blamed midnight cows, but I know, that's ridiculous. I know it was something else, that creature I saw that night. What seemed to set this theory even more in stone, once we were off the reservations and back in our local county, my ailment was gone. My daughter felt better and slept peacefully, and my husband was back to normal too. Whatever's up there, beware. It affects us all in different ways, apparently. But only my daughter seemed to know what awaited us before we went. Werewolf of Washington, from ZODIACHUNTER. My story begins in Washington State. I was about 5 years old when this first encounter happened. Now, I've always been intrigued by mysterious creatures, but I never believed they were real, just cool monsters that appeared in movies and books and stuff. But one night, I was watching a movie late with my mom and dad. I remember getting really scared while watching the movie, and my mom had to remind me that it was all fake and that there was nothing to worry about. After we finished the movie, my mom said that it was time for bed, so I had to go brush my teeth and get ready. That night, I had a very weird dream, one that had me wake up with a silent scream and tears running down my cheeks. After I caught my breath, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. When I switched on the kitchen light, right in the window where the sink was, I saw something so suddenly, so bizarre, so horrifying, that its image has been carved into my mind and soul forever. The last thing you'd expect to see in that window, or maybe you do expect it and pray that you never do see it, is some stranger's face. But instead of the face of a stranger, what I saw that night was more like a large wolf. It looked in from the window, which was 7 or 8 feet off the ground from the outside, meaning it had to have been tall, and I could only assume that it was standing on its back legs. It turned and walked away, disappearing as it seemed to walk towards the living room window. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't will myself to. I was afraid that if I made any sort of sound, it would pique its interest, and I would become its prey. But I probably already was. I stood still, only able to slightly turn my body toward the living room, waiting to see what happened. At first, I looked toward the door, expecting the thing to turn the doorknob to try to get inside. Even though I knew it was locked, I'd never felt more scared. But instead, it wasn't going through the door. The next thing I heard was the frighteningly abrupt sound of one of the glass windows shattering to bits. It was so loud, my dad woke up, and in a few instants, he ran into the living room to see what the commotion was. Now, a lot of this I don't remember. My parents say they found me on the floor, but all the memory after hearing that sound of glass, it goes black for me. But what really scares me about this experience is that my mom swears that when they found me, I was lying on the floor with a bite mark on my ankle. So maybe that thing did get inside, and it did attack me. But for some reason, my mind has blocked it all out. But I pray that what my mother saw on my ankle was something else entirely. Yet I highly doubt that. The next encounter happened when I was 17, living in Texas. I was with some of my friends watching TV. We were talking during whatever we were watching. Eventually, the conversation took some turns, and I ended up telling my friend group about my experience when I was a kid, about seeing and encountering that werewolf, or what I believe was a werewolf. Everyone except my boyfriend seemed pretty stoked about the story, maybe even believed me. My parents were out of town at the time, so I told them it was okay for them to stay over that night. We watched some movies and had a great time. Right before going to bed, we played a few board games, when Kara suddenly said, "Do you guys hear that?" We looked at one another, and I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "It sounds like snarling." I said no, rolling my eyes and laughing, thinking she's trying to scare me. After all, I did just open up to them about the weirdest and scariest experience of my life. But then there came a tapping sound at the window. I opened my blinds to see a mass that took over half of the window pane. I couldn't even scream, and then I blacked out. My boyfriend says that I fainted then and there, so he dragged me away from the window, and they helped him carry me to my parents' room. I don't know what that huge figure was, and I'm scared that that thing came back for me for whatever reason. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened in the past few months, but I am very scared of windows, and nowadays I sleep with the lights on. I never did tell my parents, probably because I wasn't supposed to have anyone over. But sometimes, I swear to God, I hear this blood-curdling howl or snarl in the middle of the night, and it's way too close to our house. It's out there, and I guess it's waiting. Camping with Bear, from Nick Z. This is a true camping experience that occurred 20 years ago at Mount Charleston, outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, in late October. My wife at the time and I had just adopted a husky German Shepherd mixed breed dog. We named him Bear. This dog was wild looking. We thought it'd be a good idea to go camping with him to bond with our new canine companion. We took him to our favorite area to camp at and hike, Mount Charleston, just outside of Vegas. The following day, we packed the Scout International with food, our camping gear, and our dog, Bear. We drove up to the mountains, arriving near Cougar Ridge Trail off Deer Creek Highway, arriving around 4 o'clock, and hiking around looking for a good spot to set up camp. We hiked for about 10 minutes up to the top of a cliff. We decided to hike down the side of the cliff and figured Bear would follow us, but he didn't. After seeing that he wasn't here with us, we shouted his name for a few moments. Then suddenly, at the top of the 30-foot cliff, we saw Bear just standing there staring at us. He stood there looking over the edge. Then he turned and disappeared. A few seconds later, he came flying off the cliff like Superman, landing at our feet and skidding past us down the mountain another 30 yards, rocks and dirt flying everywhere. Then he hit a large fallen over tree with his face and instantly stopped. We examined him, laughed a bit, and poured water into his mouth, and he was perfectly fine. After that, we had had enough excitement for the day, and the sun was going to set soon anyway, so we sped up our search for a good camping spot. We hiked on over to the next ridge away from the cliff, finding a small, flat, 15-foot clearing in the middle of a group of trees. After setting up our tent, we made a fire to prepare hot dogs for dinner. It was a clear and cool night. It was beginning to get cold fast, so we let the fire die down and went into our tent with Bear. I'm not sure how it happened, but somehow we got on the topic of demons as we laid there talking. A short while later, we both felt like it was time to talk about something else and get off that creepy subject. We both lay there silently now, and it was getting eerily quiet, until Bear suddenly growled. Soon after that, there was the sound of intense whimpering and loud barking. Suddenly, something seemed to be shaking our tent from every direction at the same time. We didn't know what was happening. The violent shaking went on for what felt like at least a minute or two. Bear was barking his head off, and we were both sitting up in our sleeping bags, absolutely petrified. As soon as the shaking calmed down, I climbed out of my sleeping bag, grabbed a knife, and unzipped the tent just far enough to peek outside. I was dumbfounded to see that outside, there was no one there. There was only the sounds of night. We immediately both grabbed our flashlights, put Bear on a leash, and unzipped the tent all the way. We climbed quickly out of the tent and bolted down the side of the mountain, completing the 10-minute hike in less than 5 minutes, arriving back to where the Scout was parked, leaving our tent and gear up on the ridge. We then drove like crazy to another area near Lee Canyon Road, parked the Scout, and the three of us slept in the back, huddling together for warmth. As soon as the sun came up at 0700, we drove back to our original parking spot and silently hiked back to our campsite on the ridge to retrieve our gear and drive back to Vegas. We never went camping together again in Mount Charleston or spoke of the incident. We never did find out what was shaking our tent, what caused everything in the woods to go silent, but I don't think we want to find out. The Haunting of Twin Peaks, from JAZMIN R. 7 months ago, in December of 2018, my family decided to rent a cabin up in Twin Peaks called Antlers Inn by Lake Arrowhead. It was going to be a fun trip because we were celebrating my brother's birthday and my parents gave me permission to invite my boyfriend. We got there on a Sunday morning. It wasn't snowing in that part of the mountains yet, so we were a bit disappointed. But we were still able to drive up to Big Bear Lake, where it actually had snow. We arrived back at the cabin at about 10 p.m. We got settled in, and I decided to make something to eat. My boyfriend and the kids were downstairs. My dad was already asleep, and my mom was in the restroom. I was pretty much alone at the time. You see, the kitchen was small, and a couple feet in front of the stove was the stairs that led to the rooms down below. I remember that I was making bacon-wrapped hot dogs. I was facing the stove when I suddenly felt that I wasn't alone, and that I saw a figure standing just behind me out of the corner of my eye. I could see it, a sort of vignette at the corner of my eye. I thought it was my boyfriend or one of the kids coming down from downstairs trying to annoy me. I turned around and there was nothing there, even though I had definitely seen something. I basically just brushed it off I ended up telling my mom when she came back from the restroom, but she also ignored it, as I probably just thought I saw something, when it was probably just some hair or something. I later told the kids too, just to try to scare them. I mean, it worked. Everyone wanted to sleep in the same bed though. It was pretty funny actually. There was this particular room that no one wanted to sleep in. Although it was early winter, that room was too cold. It was the coldest room in the cabin, even with the heaters on. This was weird for sure, and no one ended up sleeping in it. Instead, we slept in 2 other rooms, the girls in one room and the boys in the other. I ended up sneaking out of the girls' room and slept in the boys'. My boyfriend was a big scaredy cat, so I slept in his room with him, but in a different bed so that we wouldn't get in trouble. The next morning was nothing interesting, except the fact that the power went off for a brief moment, which was odd, but we brushed it off, of course. The rest of the trip went well, and we went home the next day. Fast forward a week later, my sister looks up the place that we had stayed at and went to news stories. The first thing that popped up was antlers in death, not a homicide. It even had a picture of the exact place we stayed in. Apparently, a handyman of 56 years had died there in 2011. Was this proof that the shadow I saw and felt that night was more than my imagination? That room. Maybe it was the room he died in. And that would explain why it was so cold, no matter how many heaters we had in it. Whatever it is, I don't think I'll be going back there anytime soon. Creepy Man in the Woods, from MEGAFU. I was 17 when this happened. It was about a year ago. I like to go on walks a lot. There's a bike trail by my house that I enjoy walking on. There's a nature preserve place about 5 minutes from my house, which is also right across from the trail I walk on. On one end of the trail, there's a bridge that's attached to it, and right across from this is the nature preserve. On the other end of the trail, there is a high school baseball diamond on one side and a little wooded area on the other. That's the side this incident took place on. I was walking on the trail when I look over at the baseball diamond, and I see this guy walking in the parking lot. I was getting red flags the moment I looked at him, because I knew he shouldn't have been there. This was private property, and he was quite obviously trespassing. As I keep walking, the guy squeezes through one of those triangular gates that are meant to block off cars. He just walks across the trail and into the wooded area, and stands there. As soon as I see this, I'm starting to freak out. I guess I should also add that I can't really describe what the guy looked like, because I was honestly more focused on just getting away from him, rather than paying attention to what his appearance was. Anyway, the guy walks off into the woods, so I turn around and start walking back towards my house. I keep turning my head around to look at the guy out of fear that he would follow me. An elderly couple walking their dog who was also on the trail noticed the guy too, and noticed that I keep turning around to look at him. The woman told me that they would keep watching him, and would tell me if it looked like he was trying to do something. Thank God for them, because as I kept going further and further away from the guy, I noticed that the distance did not increase between us. He was, in fact, following me, and he was attempting to hide himself within the trees as he stared at me. That's when I started running, and I didn't stop until I was back home, and even then I checked every window, trying to see if he was in the tree line still, wondering if he was going to stalk me this far. Even though this happened a year ago, I'm still nervous to go on that side of the trail. I even bought pepper spray shortly after this, and now I never go on walks without having that pepper spray with me. It's best to never go alone, and at least never go without protection. Friendly Neighborhood Skinwalker, from Colin S. It was the beginning of summer that year. I'd just gotten home from the store and had to take some stuff over to my friend's house. When I got there, her mom told me that she was walking her dog with a friend of hers, and to go find her. By the time I found her, she was already over by the pond. I should mention here that the pond is surrounded by woods. I remember my friend telling me that when she was little, she thought she looked cool when she took her feet off the pedals of her bike and just let it coast. So when I drove by on my bike, I was doing the same thing and yelling, "Look at me, I'm so cool." When I laughed, it was pretty quiet, but for some reason, the laugh began to be repeated and echoed in the nearby woods. Except it sounded wrong. Needless to say, this was freaky, but I tried my best to ignore it. Later that night, I was playing Dungeons & Dragons with all of my friends. We were at a different person's house, but they were still located very close to that pond. The night went good. We did our usual festivities and later hit the hay. I was one of the last people to leave in the morning, and I decided to bike home since this house was so close to mine. On the way out, his mom stopped us. She looked extremely tired, like she didn't sleep at all last night. She asked, "Were you guys outside last night, just screaming?" My eyes widened. I shook my head. We hadn't heard anything like that last night. In fact, we had just been minding our own business in the basement. A few days later, I was riding my bike around and decided to stop and walk around the pond for a little bit. It was then that I realized I had to use the restroom. My house was a bit too far away, so I did what any rational person would do. I found a good tree and I did my business. When I was done and getting ready to head back on the bike, I heard the sound of sobs and screams. They were feminine, and they were coming from within the trees. It was god-awful horrifying, and I sped away on my bike as fast as I could. I think whatever it was wanted me out of its territory, but luckily for me, I would not stick around anywhere if I heard something like that again. Nowadays, I'm just terrified of that pond. Well, I'm a bit too spookified for the time being, and now going outside sounds too creepy for me to just go try losing some weight on a walk. So I'll just sit back, enjoy PewDiePie playing Minecraft, and try my best to ignore the tapping at my window. Yeah, my neighbors are freaky, and apparently hairy. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, send it to us at darknessprevails.org/submit or darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below, where you can donate on my Patreon, shop at my merchandise, or start investing with acorns. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, titled 5 Rainy Day Horror Stories. The Human says, "You posted this while it's storming where I live." Considering around 30,000 people watch these videos, I'm not surprised that some people get to watch it when it's actually storming. That's the cool part. What's weird though was when I decided on making this video about rainy day stories, we weren't expecting any weather, but by the time I started recording we had a thunderstorm over us. Kinda creepy, but cool. Shadow Scream says, "You should definitely add some gameplay from a game on screen in future vids. I'm getting asked this a lot recently, and while I'd love to, because I love games and I haven't been able to catch up on what I like, I think it's technically against the rules to monetize gameplay videos without a purpose or commentary, because if it was just background footage, it doesn't directly relate to the video. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd love to get some gameplay footage going on." And Richard Chocolate says, "Nothing quite like Minecraft and rainy scary stories." That brings me back to the good old days. When I was younger, I played Minecraft for the first time, skipping school on a rainy day, That is an experience I won't forget, and sadly one I won't get back. Finn Nebauer says, I'm heading to America now. Hope it doesn't rain on my plane, or lightning. Wish me luck, and love your videos, Darkness. Welcome back. Or if you're visiting, be sure to try some Southern-style barbecue before you go. And I'm Under Your Bed says, try being in the woods during a rainstorm. There's nothing else like it. I hope I can buy some land out in the country again one day. When you grow up in the woods and can't afford to go back, it kinda does something to you. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't worry, because more scary stories are on the way soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.